It should be relatively short and sweet for a couple of reasons. I think one, we've covered a lot of the topics um, um, already in the previous ones, but then there's only a handful of posts, and I'll start, I think, with Natasha's because Brian was the last one to comment on that. Um, so you looked at sample A, but both of you did. Yeah, Natasha, your summary and explanation is solid. The one thing that I would highlight, I'm glad you brought this up, is that the student used the Cold War in support of the claim. If you look in the guide, and this will also come up in conversation, what makes Glopo unique is that the data or the evidence that students can use or should be using is within the student's lifetime, so that it's constantly evolving. The number of cases is always evolving, and we focused on that because it would allow students again to make connections to something that the politics that happened within their lifetime. This isn't diplomatic history, and it's certainly not. History of IR, which obviously has a broader time scale, so that when the Cold War would student would be penalized for that. Not that we penalize them at all in assessments, but um, it really does. It sort of falls outside of the realm of what is considered strong or purposeful responses. My students now we can't. It's odd. The Rwandan genocide, for example, is out of our students' lifetime, and so therefore it's not a case that at first pass should be included in a discussion of, say, humanitarian intervention or identity-based conflict, things like that. That doesn't mean that we ignore those cases, because you certainly can make the connection between the Rwandan genocide and then um, the subsequent, the Congolese wars, or even some of the violence that's and peacekeeping missions that occur in Eastern Congo today, or make up. Anyway, you can make the connections there if you know the region well. But the idea itself is that we should be focusing on cases that are within the student's lifetime in support of particular claims. So there's no reason to, the other way to think about it is there's no reason to have a litany of all the possible historical narrative and background. I mean, if you're bringing up Iran, yes, you can trace you could perhaps trace, and some do, um, the current animosity back on to U.S. policy during the Cold War. Um, and Khamenei has mentioned this in the past on several occasions. That said, the current that's only one piece. It's particularly small or lightweight piece of evidence um, that's that's used in explaining the development of Iran's policy and posture towards nuclear energy and then weapons, not just nuclear weapons, but also missile technology and overall approach to the region. And so a student writing about, say, Iran and Iran's power, and this helped me transition to Brian's point, um, would want to focus on contemporary politics, not the litany of animosity between, say, the United States and Iran, or the support of the Soviet Union, and then lack of support, and then return of support, and then with Russia. I mean, there's no reason to go into the historical narratives here because I don't know, demonstrating that somehow is a cause and effect is not the task for the students of global politics. If this were a history course, then I think that we would maybe perhaps weigh the strength and limitations of that approach. Um, but in our course, no, we're focusing on within the student's lifetime and the contemporary bit there. I'll borrow from Bueno de Mesquita, Bruce Bueno de Mesquita, sorry, um, who's up at NYU, and now he does game theory and rational choice. So we can argue or talk about the strengths and limits of that particular approach. But his model of looking at world politics, and he looks at Iran in particular, and there's a fantastic TED talk if you want to search for it. Maybe I'll put the link in this response. Um, but he focuses on what current political leaders know and can do, and he has a good explanation as to why history matters less when it comes to political science, and particularly understanding and predicting international affairs. So actually, I'll make sure I include that link. In fact, I'm just getting a link now so I can include it underneath this post. It's worth watching, and interesting enough, it actually, the argument actually holds relatively well, considering he published it about 7 years ago, at least on TED, and he's been doing work for the U.S. Department of Defense and CIA ever since, or prior to that. So in any event, just thought I'd pick up on that in the Cold War. Brian, your comment about power. This is, you're right, the paper does suffer from a lack of clear definition. I think that's useful advice when we think about how to advise our students. I always suggest that students, and this is a great way to connect to, when we talk about TOK type of exercises, is developing conceptual definitions pretty early on. I think I've mentioned this before. Yes, we obviously have the guide, but the exercise you walked through as well in identifying and identifying concepts, developing conceptual definitions, connecting to real-world examples, that's something that your students should be doing regularly, and that should appear probably or most likely on their responses. So power writ large actually doesn't say anything unless you're talking about the varieties of power and then how they're used in the political process, how they're used, or the extent to which they're used to make others do what they would otherwise not, for example. That's the sort of thing. So you're right to say that the response it does suffer from that sort of clear thinking. Again, this is one where there can be open-ended responses, and I'm just looking at your second and third and third paragraphs again. So, the idea here is that it's not a matter of disproving a particular student's argument. We all come in as assessment with our theoretical perspectives and our biases, and you can make the argument that military power is diminishing in its utility, and yet you can also make the argument that military power remains significantly important to world in world politics by the awareness of the condition. If you were to make the claim, for example, that that Russia is able to articulate its interests through the threat and use of military power, then you'd have a really good example of them doing that, and that dates back easily since the second intervention into the Caucasus. Certainly with the relationship with Georgia as well as Ukraine, and its projection of military power through traditional as well as unconventional means. It is ensuring that NATO expansion is limited and is able to articulate Russia's foreign policy interests in whether it's Europe facing or Asia facing. Iran would be the same case. Is American military power waning? Yeah, maybe not. Or sorry, maybe is it diminishing? That depends on how you define diminishing in terms of achieving goals. Battlefield goals, there's no comparison. Long-term civil society, nation-building goals, I'm not sure that ever had so much power in and of itself. So I think one way to look, and I'm not sure. Hopefully, I'm reading your commentary right. Is that when our goal is not necessarily to argue with the student response, more so it is to see the extent to which the student can make a reasoned and well supported argument that can engage in a high level discussion about world politics. Maybe that's the best way to say that. So let's see. Take a look at the other response, which was Mark's. And then I got to wrap up because you probably have listened to me for more than 30 minutes today. Natasha, your point again, grammatical errors taken into consideration. Don't forget that we're reading in English, and many students, their first language isn't English. My advice to students is in the ways in which they improve their grammar. And in previous years, I've had cohorts of about between a third and half of my students are not native speakers of English, even though we're in a school in the United States. So I will send students to work with their either English tutors or their language B instructors if they're taking English B, things along those lines. My advice, though, is as they work to develop those skill sets over the 2 years of the course, is always that the grammar shouldn't necessarily be distracting. If it's difficult to understand a student's point holistically over the arc of the argument as a result of grammar, well, then then the student hasn't made a convincing argument. It's not whether or not their grammatical arguments are correct, but as the course is facilitated in English and examined in English, there's no penalty or no downgrade per se for students who it's clear that their first language isn't in English. And it's just things we need to be cognizant of. The examiners are cognizant of this too, but it's really the ways in which the student presents the argument. So, for example, if verb conjugation doesn't work out perfectly each time, or the sentence structure from students who come from Asia is particularly from China, very different, even after 2 years of IB coursework. It can be very different than a native English speaker. If you understand what the student's point is, and as an examiner, as you recognize that, seeing that and being aware of that in the construction, then no, there's no penalty per se or lack of awarding highest marks. If the language is confusing, if the language is opaque, if it's unclear what the student is saying as a result, then it's just an unclear response. I think that's the bit there. I think both of you in this case chose the sort of the higher end responses that were in the sample, and of course there's no ideal samples. We pick things for a variety of reasons. Or sorry, the assessment folks and the workshop developers. In this case, it was me. We tried to get a broad range, but we were also pretty early on in the process. I would love to come back in a year or so and redo this entire workshop with some new samples and some other activities. But that's a sort of a longer term question here and there. So, all right, that's all the responses I see for learning or for Module 2. So I'll post these videos, or these videos are being posted, and then look forward to everyone starting their work on the internally assessed elements Wednesday. Same advice as last time. You all are professional, and you can organize yourself based on time zone, affinity, whatever you find works best. I see no reason to put you all into groups that don't work for you. So this is your workshop. Please continue to do the work that you're doing. Again, if you've still got folks if there's still folks who need to post and to engage, do so today. And then let's plan on Skyping tomorrow. I'll be available via Skype tomorrow evening, but let's make it a little bit more general. If you need to chat, let's just get a hold of me via Skype on Wednesdays across the board. Maybe text, message me first on Skype, and if I'm able to video chat, we can. If not, I can just IM back and forth, and maybe we'll make it more flexible. Let's do Wednesdays as Skype days, and we'll go from there. So, okay, thanks.